Somebody has to corral this group. I saw Mayor Pro Tem Quintanilla close by. Thank you all for being here. Today's study session has been scheduled to get an update on utility undergrounding. Take it away.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm Ryan Gaylor with the Capital Projects Division. I want to start by giving a brief history of undergrounding in Palm Desert. Even before the city was established in 1973, residents of this area were pushing for all new development to be undergrounded. So not long after the city actually was incorporated, a law was passed that required new development to underground the utilities. Neighborhoods that were built before 1973 and some areas that have been incorporated into the city still have overhead utilities in their yards. In 2015, the city formed an ad hoc committee to address the remaining areas that have overhead utilities. The ad hoc committee met for a year and then provided a recommendation to the city council that undergrounding of utilities should be a goal of the city council and that a master plan would be created. And this recommendation was adopted by the city council. So Public Works contracted with a consultant to create the utility undergrounding master plan with the goal of the master plan to determine how to relocate all the overhead utility lines underground. The consultant created an inventory of all the locations that has overhead utilities and divided the locations into 3 categories. And those categories are arterial projects, neighborhood projects, or other projects. The consultant also provided a cost estimate for each type of location and created a plan that identifies and analyzes various funding mechanisms, and finally provides recommendations for proceeding with projects. Let's take a look first at arterial projects. So arterial projects are for utilities that run along the rights of way of major arterial streets. You'll see these on Monterey Avenue, Portola, Country Club. And these are not just the 30-foot lines. These are the ones that are way up there. Due to the proximity to arterial corridors, these projects are deemed as of a general benefit to the city. If we wanted to underground all these utilities in today's dollars, it would be about $170 million. We're looking at about 10.5 miles of lines to underground. But due to the cost and complexity of this type of project, if the city council wants to pursue undergrounding these type of lines, staff would recommend breaking this task into several smaller projects. We're imagining maybe 1.5 to 2 miles every project, and each project would take about 5 years to complete at a cost of approximately $35 million in today's dollars. And if you're to consider cost rising at a rate of 3% per year, the next project 5 years later would cost over $40 million. So in order to do these types of projects, we would need to identify a funding source to do these. Let's see. So most conversation I've had with residents that want undergrounding, it has nothing to do with the arterial projects that we just looked at. It has more to do with the utility lines that are stretched across their front or backyards. Neighborhood projects are for residential areas serviced by overhead utilities. And the city, through the utility undergrounding master plan, has developed a step-by-step guide that's designed to assist residents with creating an undergrounding district. Unlike arterial projects, the city is restricted from bearing most of the costs of the projects that would be in neighborhoods. Our consultant has recommended to continue using assessment districts as a means of funding neighborhood projects. It's also recommended by our consultant that the city transition to the use of a fast track process for these residential projects that are in neighborhoods. City currently has one active resident initiated project in the neighborhood, and that was created using the traditional method. Now, the traditional method, it pays for the design up front, and then the project goes to a vote of the property owners to determine if the project will be funded. This method requires a large investment up front to design the project. And the downside is there's a potential that once the residents find out the cost of the assessment, they vote it down, and all the money that went to the design is lost. With the fast track method, an engineer would calculate the estimated project cost and initiate a vote of the resident or of the property owners based upon that estimate. This reduces the risk of wasting funding on design. However, the risk is if the engineer estimates wrong, we're stuck with the assessment that they've gone with. So there is a little bit of risk in both cases. But the consultant that I've dealt with has successfully completed many of these fast track methods in other municipalities. But whether the traditional method or the fast track method is used, the district is passed by an affirmative vote of greater than 50% of the property owners within a district. For these neighborhood locations, the current cost of undergrounding those is estimated to be $481 million, which would need to be borne primarily by the property owners within the area. That's fine.
If we're looking at the city and the arterial changes and you're advising that that be completed over stages, would that same idea or project timeline apply to residential neighborhoods to split it up over time?
Yeah, by sort of with the neighborhood projects, it automatically, it sort of naturally pieces itself into small pieces because with the neighborhood projects, you'll have a proponent who is interested in undergrounding and they gather support from their neighbors. They do a petition. And so most of the time, if you have a proponent, they're doing sort of bite-sized chunks. And so it would automatically sort of create smaller zones to be done like that.
To feature the basic distinction, the arterials would be funded by the city.
That's
the
correct.
Neighborhoods have to be funded by the property owners because the other property owners have essentially funded undergrounding through purchase prices.
That's correct.
So we're not in direct control of when neighborhoods demonstrate majority support for making that expenditure.
Correct.
Is that?
Yep. Okay. I mentioned there's another category besides arterial and residential projects, and I call them other projects, and it's projects that don't fit well into either of the other two categories. And many times it's lines that are on private property that may be undergrounded as part of future land development. Or some of the examples that I can think of are a half a block south of Hobley Lane West. You have these big lines there. They're not on an arterial street. They're really not in a neighborhood, and they're just sort of sitting there. And the adjacent property owners, if they wanted to get together and fund that, it's sort of one of the unusual situations. So we have a few of those throughout the city where it doesn't fit into arterial or residential. And those projects are estimated to cost about $41 million. So the purpose of this meeting was to sort of introduce the subject and inform the city council of the scope of the undergrounding issue and to gather information on how this city council wants to address undergrounding in the city going forward. One of the questions may be, does this city council want this program to remain one of the goals of the city at this time? And if the city council wants to explore options for funding arterial projects, staff can work on a finance plan to see how to make that happen. So I've sort of quickly gone over utility undergrounding in Palm Desert. Are there any other questions?
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. And I recall going back a few years, I thought there were credits that could be obtained and that the city of Indian Wells was taking advantage of it. And I thought our city was looking into that at some point. I think this was before Todd came on board.
Yeah,
What's happened with it?
those are Rule 20A credits, and the PUC has discontinued that program, but before they discontinued it, the city took advantage of, I think we had $700,000 of credits, and we were able to utilize some of those credits to do an undergrounding project in front of Ironwood Park. And so that is in process. We've met recently with SCE. They're getting ready to put it to civil. So that was estimated at $500,000 worth of credits, and that is in process. But from here on out, we have no more credits. And honestly, the trickle of money that came in from those credits was pretty much useless.
Thank you.
Thank you. I thought that we had worked on creating areas that would make sense. And you talked about having that one person who took it on. Didn't we create little assessment type of areas?
In the undergrounding master plan, the consultant put forth his idea of what would make sense as neighborhood districts. So those maybe a proponent would accept that boundary as what they want to do, or maybe they'd want to do something smaller or larger. It was just an idea to see what is out there, and there's different options available.
Okay, so it's just a starting place. I have one more thing. Does it make sense when I look at whether it's the arterial or the neighborhood, it kind of makes sense that those are going to be in the same neighborhoods or the same areas when we get to the point where we say, you know, we're really going to run fiber with all the other utilities. When I looked at those maps, that looks like where fiber would go too. Is there a possibility, and there's so many grants for that connectivity and, you know, for getting broadband to all, would it be possible to kind of coordinate those efforts and maybe take some of that real high cost off of the city's back and off of the neighbors' back?
Yeah, we can definitely look at that whenever, if we get down the road with this, we'll work with SCE to see about getting a joint trench where we could have some conduit for future fiber.
Because I would think there'd be grants available for the broadband for all, and perhaps we can use those. Thank you.
I understand now. I can speak with SCE about this. I know in other times, whenever I've tried to coordinate stuff with SCE, they are an unwilling partner. But we'll definitely look at that and see what options are available. Yeah.
Your query to us was, do we want to find funding, or do we want to drop this as a goal? And I'm wondering if there might be a third path, which is to keep it as a goal, but to recognize that it's not opportune right now to secure the funding, since funding the new fire station has already been identified as a top priority for voter approval. So if we chose this path, we'd be saying let's keep it as a goal and keep our eyes sharp for grant funding or other new systems, perhaps superior to Rule 20A, that would make it timely to move forward. Would that be an option?
Definitely.
On the option notes, I just am looking at when we looked at that arterial map, and that goes through so much of what is currently undeveloped. And they, you know, as we go down Portola, I mean, we can see the areas that it's undeveloped. Is there any kind of thought that maybe, and later on, we're going to be dealing with TUMF fees. Is there some sort of fee that says you're going to be using those that can be added to the pot to help us accumulate the funds then to underground those, the arterial kind of lines?
Are you talking about an impact fee of some sort?
Some sort.
We can research it. Veronica, do you want to weigh in?
One of the things that we have been looking at is possibly a citywide CFD that covers those sorts of costs for future development. It's certainly something we can explore further. One of the things that's hard with that is that some of these are transmission lines. And so determining the benefit is going to be something that's going to be challenging for us. So, but it's certainly something we're willing to look into more.
And I have a follow-up question then for you on that. So you're basically talking about, it would ultimately end up on the homeowner then, right? Like a Mello-Roos type of fee on
would-
housing?
It would be
which-
something that we could, what I have seen in other cities is they put it in place before entitlements are issued. And so it's something that goes with the development, and ultimately it is the homeowner that is responsible for paying it long-term.
Yeah, I just wonder what that would add to the cost of the already unaffordable housing price.
It's,
So,
Councilmember Drury.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Can you describe the process? If there is a proponent out there, they can right now today start a petition to create an assessment district. What is that process all about? I mean, in other words, can you walk me through the process that it would take for a proponent to achieve that?
Okay. Proponent would gather signatures. I guess first they would establish a boundary and gather signatures from the people within that boundary. They would need to receive affirmative signatures from over 70% of the property owners in the boundary. They would bring that paperwork to the city to get it, to run it through the city clerk to make sure that the signatures are correct. At that point, if everything is in order, the city would initiate a district. Once the district is established, with the fast track method, the assessment engineer would create an estimate of the cost to each property owner for each parcel. That would be given to the property owners to vote on. If 50 plus 1% approved it, it would become a district. And I forgot to mention that if you want any more information on utility undergrounding, there's a page on our website on palmdesert.gov. If you search for utility undergrounding, it has the fast track method and the master plan is on there as well.
So then does that reflect that we have adopted the fast track method?
I don't think the city council has officially adopted any method. I'm sorry, the city council has adopted both methods. Whenever they adopted the utility undergrounding master plan, both of those were options. And my recommendation would be to, going forward, only use the fast track method.
And is there any downside from the city's perspective?
The downside is if the assessment engineer came up with a low estimate, I believe the city would be on the hook to complete the project. But there's many factors of safety and contingency that the assessment engineer puts on the cost. And to my knowledge, he hasn't had a situation, in the person that I've talked to, he hasn't had a situation where he had to go back and pay more after the fact.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand that, are you saying if the first estimate was 60 million and the neighborhood voted to approve 60 million and the project moves forward and it costs 66 million, we pick up the extra 6?
Correct.
So we're betting, if you will, that the estimate is liberal enough that that's not going to happen. Are there ways to guide the estimate process to help make sure that happens?
Yeah, if you get a good estimate engineer who has a lot of experience, they've seen the problems that can arise, and they can put safety factors on the estimate. And so there's ways to work around that issue.
And do we pick the estimator?
Yes.
If others concur, it would seem to make sense for you to bring an action item back to us, formally choosing the fast track method. Does that seem?
That could happen.
So with that method, we're stuck for the cost of the very expensive down to the penny estimate engineering plan.
Yes.
Okay. Obviously, today we aren't making a binding decision. We're just voicing what should come back to us for a final decision, and it looks like that should. And I suppose I haven't heard any sentiment for sure. Let's figure out what tax people might be eager to pay so we could launch tackling the arterials now. So presumably when we get to our goal setting next spring, we can clarify the status of this, but preliminarily it seems to make sense to keep it as a goal, but one that we're not currently seeking to fund. Yes.
Still looking at the different segments and looking at Councilmember Nastande's point about unaffordable housing and things get it added on top. Let's say there's a neighborhood where you get 70% support and they say, yes, let's move forward. And when they look at the numbers, there's minimal support and they get that 51%. So it technically passed. Is there a way for them to say, okay, we'll do these few blocks first instead of we'll address this whole area so that things get added incrementally? Because clearly it's needed. Some residents want it for aesthetic reasons, but we're looking at is safety reasons and longevity reasons. But how do we balance resources available to our residents and the need to underground? Where's that sweet spot in the Venn diagram?
So with neighborhood projects, once you get the over 50% approval, everything sort of happens at once. It's an all or nothing type of deal. The second part of your question, I forgot. I'm sorry.
Well, I
No,
think
that was it.
Okay.
And I don't know if this was in the question or if the question prompts this curiosity, but if during the course of the process, it turns out we have a proposed district which has State Street running down the middle of it. And during the course of the process, it comes to light that everybody east of State Street really wants to do this and everybody west of State Street really doesn't want to do this. Is it possible to redefine the district?
I believe that is possible. I'm sort of shooting from the hip. I don't know the answer to your question.
Fair enough. Sure.
So, but doing it the latter way, where the city's on the hook, like if the bid comes in at 60 million and it actually costs 66 million, the city's on the hook for the approximate 6 million. But the 70% that have signed off on it are going to know the cost is 60 million. So if they sign the petition, they somewhat know what they're getting into, correct, financially?
Correct.
So there's
That-
there's no surprises. So they won't sign the petition
That's
if they say, oh, there's no way I'm going to pay this much.
Yeah, with the fast track method, they get the benefit of having the number up front and they know what they're getting into.
Thank you.
One more.
Naturally, okay.
You scheduled too
and-
much time for
to-
this.
yeah,
stuff.
sorry. Sorry, piggyback on Gina's, they will know the cost per household before they sign the petition. Not the overall, like, oh, it's 60 million. Well, they'll know individually what they're on the hook for.
They'll not only know the estimate for the total project cost, they'll know the estimate for their parcel as well, yes.
One more, sorry. The, going back to the arterials, estimated cost of 33 million for the ones that are mapped out here, need to identify funding source. Can you just throw out some, I mean, are you aware of what possible funding? I mean, it could be an assessment, a tax, it could be grants, it could be.
Yeah, our consultant came up with a few options here. We've explored some of these and found that there's some drawbacks to them, the utility surcharge, utility users tax, CFD, sales tax. Now, the drawback with this is if we specify we want to do a tax for a specific purpose, it's sort of, I think you have to have 66% to get it.
Sorry to make you do that twice. Thank you,
No
Ryan.
problem.
I really have one more question.
Yeah.
So I'm looking, we look at the one and we say it's 10.5 miles. The other is in lineal feet. Is that because it's parcel, so it's per foot, how they're charged?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Run while you can.
Thanks.
Anything else for our study session?
Not at this time.
All right, everybody, please be back right at the dot of 3:30.